She's just the help," the groom said with a smirk, loud enough for every guest to hear. He didn't know the woman he dismissed so casually had once been on the cover of Forbes, that she had built a medical empire from a run-down clinic while raising her daughter alone. He didn't know she'd sold her wedding ring to buy antibiotics for that same child. He only saw a modest old woman in an outdated dress and assumed she didn't matter. But she was there for a reason. She didn't come to impress. She came to remember. And by the time the truth was revealed, every jaw in the ballroom had dropped, and the man who once sneered would find himself on his knees, begging. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about dignity, deception, and a mother's quiet strength. Stay with me. This wedding is about to become unforgettable. Meredith Lancaster had always known silence better than noise. It was her oldest companion, comforting, predictable, a refuge after decades spent making decisions that moved markets and saved lives. At 68, her estate sat nestled behind ancient trees in the quietest corner of Connecticut, where the only sound was wind rustling leaves and occasionally the cry of a hawk overhead. Her days were filled with long walks, classical music echoing softly through the halls, and letters she never mailed. She hadn't been seen at a public event in almost 5 years, but today the sound that pierced the stillness was the click of red-bottomed heels. Too fast, too nervous. Emily. Meredith turned from the window, her silver hair pinned back in a loose twist, a soft gray sweater hanging delicately on her narrow shoulders. Her daughter swept into the room with a designer bag slung over one arm and eyes sparkling, not with joy, but urgency. "Mom," she exhaled, "you won't believe what just happened." Meredith said nothing, only gestured to the couch. She'd learned that her daughter needed space to speak before she was ready to listen. "I'm getting married," Emily blurted, as if saying it faster made it more real. "His name is Miles, investment consulting. We met at a networking brunch in Soho, and he proposed last night at the Met, right in front of the Monet exhibit." She extended her hand, the diamond catching the sunlight like a flare. Meredith took it gently, more focused on the tremble in her daughter's voice than the clarity of the gem. "I see," Meredith said softly. "And is this what brings you here? Unannounced, after 3 weeks of silence?" Emily flushed. "I know. I should have called sooner. It's just, things have been moving so fast." Clearly. There was a pause, the kind that separates what is said from what is truly meant. "I need to ask you something," Emily began, looking everywhere but her mother's face. "It's about the wedding, about you." Meredith nodded slowly. "Go on." "Miles' family. They're really down to earth. Simple. They value hard work and modesty. His mom was a nurse. His dad taught shop class. They're not flashy people. And you, well, you're you." Meredith raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment or a concern?" "I just don't want them to get the wrong idea," Emily rushed. "Could you maybe not mention the business or the foundation or the Forbes thing? Maybe wear something low-key and drive the Buick instead of the Jag?" There it was, the request. Meredith didn't flinch, but inside something small cracked. Not for the first time. She'd seen this coming since Emily was in college, since the day her daughter had asked if she could just say her mom worked in healthcare instead of ran one of the largest medical ventures on the Eastern Seaboard. Meredith clasped her hands in her lap. "You want me to pretend to be someone else?" "No, just tone things down. For the dinner, just for now. First impressions matter, and they might feel outmatched." "I see," Meredith said again. Her voice was still calm, but now laced with something else, a weariness that ran deeper than tiredness. "Please, Mom, this is really important to me." Meredith stood and walked toward the fireplace, where a photo of Emily as a toddler stood framed in crystal, her daughter, muddy and grinning, clutching a toy stethoscope, back when all she wanted was to be just like her mother, and now she wanted the world to forget who that mother was. "You know," Meredith said, still facing the photo. I used to imagine this moment differently. You running in, breathless with happiness, asking me to help plan the wedding, not to hide from it. Emily looked down, silent. I'm not angry, Meredith continued, just surprised. I didn't realize being your mother had become something to be managed. Emily bit her lip. It's not that. I just want things to go smoothly. Smoothly, Meredith echoed. There was another long pause. Then she turned, smiled faintly, and said, All right. Emily blinked. Wait, really? I'll wear the gray dress. I'll drive the Buick. And I won't mention a thing about the past. The relief on Emily's face was immediate. Thank you. I knew you'd understand. I always have, Meredith murmured. Emily kissed her cheek and rushed out just as quickly as she came. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Meredith stood alone in the quiet again, but now it was heavier than before. She walked to her study, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder marked Emily, Private. Inside were clippings, letters, bank drafts, reminders of every sacrifice she'd ever made. She closed the drawer without looking at them. Hide who I am, she whispered. And for the first time in years, Meredith Lancaster made a decision that wasn't for the company or for her daughter, but for herself. After Emily left, the house seemed to breathe again, the silence folding in like a protective cloak. Meredith walked slowly down the corridor toward her private study. Every creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet echoed like a memory. She passed family photos in gilded frames, Emily's first recital, her high school graduation, the two of them smiling with wind-blown hair on the coast of Maine. Carefully curated, carefully kept, but not one revealed the storm that came after. She paused before a cabinet in the far corner, one few visitors had ever noticed. With steady fingers, she unlocked it and pulled out a slim box, mahogany scuffed at the edges. Inside, neat folders labeled in her crisp handwriting. One read, 2008, collapse. Another, Emily, medical emergency. She opened the second. Inside lay a single receipt from a pawn shop in Newark and a faded photo of a diamond ring, her first wedding ring. She had sold it on a February morning in 2009, the sky thick with snow. Emily had been 12, burning with fever, and Meredith's new clinic hadn't received its first round of funding yet. No investor wanted to touch her after the pharmaceutical crash took out half her partners. Bankruptcy loomed like a predator. That day, she'd stood in a pawn shop with shaking hands, trading sentiment for survival. The money had paid for antibiotics and a hospital bed. She could still remember the heat of Emily's forehead, the labored breath, the quiet whimper as the IV needle slid in. Meredith had stayed at her side all night, whispering promises that one day everything would be better. And it had been. But not because anyone had saved her. Meredith had clawed her way back, bit by bit, deal by deal, turning what remained of her reputation into something useful. She built a new company from ashes, built it fast, built it smart. It grew quietly, efficiently. She kept her name off the headlines for years. Let the CEOs pose while she wrote the contracts and shaped the strategy. When she finally made Forbes, she was already semi-retired. Emily never knew. She had been too young to understand the collapse, and Meredith had wanted it that way. She thought protecting her meant hiding the hardship, the compromises, the decisions that carved pieces from her soul. Maybe that had been her mistake. Maybe that's why her daughter could now ask her to pretend again. Meredith closed the folder and slid it back into the box. Her hand lingered on another envelope, thick and sealed with wax. She didn't open it. Not yet. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from her assistant, Janine. Investor dinner, confirmed Tuesday. Do you still want to go incognito? Meredith smiled faintly, still, as if she ever stopped. She tapped a quick reply, then turned back toward the main hallway. On the console table sat a silver picture frame, Elizabeth and her at the groundbreaking ceremony for their first clinic. Elizabeth had been all fire and optimism, Meredith, all precision. They'd built something together, once. Something that mattered. Now, her daughter wanted her to build a lie. She returned to her room and stood before the mirror. Her reflection stared back with unreadable calm, hair pinned, posture straight, eyes sharp beneath the surface of age. Not the look of a servant, no matter how modest the clothes. But perhaps that's what made it perfect. Her hand reached automatically for her jewelry drawer, but paused. Instead, she opened the velvet pouch tucked at the back. Inside, a pair of simple pearl studs. Not the diamond earrings worth 6 figures. These had belonged to her mother. She placed them on her ears with quiet ceremony. Downstairs, she inspected the garage. Her Jaguar gleamed, polished, and regal. But tucked away behind it sat the dusty old Buick, unused for months. She touched the handle. It creaked. Perfect. As she climbed the stairs again, the house's stillness shifted, less like peace, more like anticipation. She returned to her study once more. The sun had dipped slightly, casting amber light through the bay windows. Meredith stood in the middle of the room, then turned her eyes toward the box she'd left open. The sealed envelope caught the light just so. Her gaze lingered. There was something different in her eyes now, not just calm, not resignation. Resolve. She would do what Emily asked. She would play the part, wear the pearls, drive the Buick, pretend she had never built an empire from ruin. She would sit at the dinner table and let herself be judged. But she would not forget, and she would not go unarmed, because some truths deserved to wait, and others deserved to be unveiled with precision. The sky was streaked with fading pink when Meredith turned the Buick onto a narrow street lined with compact manicured homes. Each lawn was freshly trimmed, flower beds curated for show rather than soul. She found the address easily, a 2-story townhouse with beige siding and an American flag fluttering from the porch. It was pleasant, predictable, the kind of house that tried a little too hard to be unimpressive. She parked 2 doors down and stepped out, smoothing the creases from her oatmeal-colored skirt. No makeup except a touch of powder, no jewelry beyond the pearls. Her shoes were old flats, practical and worn. She rang the bell at precisely 6. The door opened too fast. Miles stood there in a crisp button-down and jeans, just expensive enough to seem casual. His expression flickered for a half-second. Confusion, then recognition, then calculation. "Ah," he said, stepping aside. "You must be Meredith." Before she could reply, he added with a grin toward the living room, "Emily's mom, the housekeeper." Laughter filtered faintly from the next room. Meredith blinked once. "Yes," she said smoothly. "That's me." Emily appeared from the hallway, face flushed. "Mom, she began, but Meredith offered a small, measured smile. "It's all right, dear," she said gently. "Let's not make a fuss." Miles led the way to the living room. "This is my mother, Lisa, and my father, Gerald." Lisa stood with the poise of someone who'd rehearsed her movements in the mirror. She wore a cashmere sweater set, pearls that looked too perfect to be real, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So lovely of you to join us," she said, extending a hand that was limp and cool. "Likewise," Meredith replied. Gerald didn't rise from his recliner. He gave a nod in her direction, eyes flicking from her modest handbag to her thrift store shoes, and returned to his sports channel without a word. "Come," Lisa said, turning abruptly. "Let's eat before it gets cold." The dining room was narrow but well lit, with framed quotes about family and faith lining the walls. The table was set with dollar store elegance, mismatched napkins, slightly chipped plates, wine glasses filled with water. A roast sat steaming in the center, flanked by canned green beans and boxed potatoes, fluffed with effort. Miles gestured toward a chair at the end of the table, the one with a slight wobble. "Right here, Meredith." She sat without comment. "Emily tells us you've done some domestic work." Lisa said as she passed the rolls. Must be rewarding, keeping things tidy. It has its moments, Meredith said softly, accepting a roll she wouldn't eat. Gerald cleared his throat. Must be hard at your age, lifting things, scrubbing floors. Meredith folded her hands. One adjusts. Miles works with some very important clients, Lisa said, as if to pivot. Finance people, real estate tycoons. He's doing quite well. I'm proud of him, Meredith said, glancing at Emily, who stared down at her plate. Of course, now that Emily's marrying into our family, she won't need to worry about extra income, Lisa added with a smile. We believe in providing security. Meredith nodded once. Security is valuable. Miles leaned back in his chair, chewing slowly. Yeah, Emily's got some fancy design job or something, right? But we're thinking once the kids come along, she'll probably want to stay home. Of course, Lisa chimed in. Full-time work isn't exactly maternal. Meredith took a sip of water. Her hands didn't shake. You have any other children? Lisa asked, tilting her head in a way that suggested she already knew the answer. No, Meredith replied. Emily is my only one. Well, you must be so proud of how far she's come, Lisa said sweetly, escaping those humble roots. Meredith smiled faintly. She's always had potential. Throughout the meal, no one asked what she did. No one asked what books she liked or where she'd traveled or what she thought about the upcoming election. She wasn't there as a person, just a backdrop, a footnote to someone else's story. And Emily said nothing. Not when Miles referred to her mother as helpful, but a bit old-fashioned. Not when Lisa asked whether Meredith could babysit someday once she retired from cleaning. Not even when Gerald made a quiet joke about people knowing their place. Meredith watched her daughter smile politely, nod, take small bites of roast beef like it didn't taste like betrayal. But Meredith said nothing, because this was a test. And she never walked into a test without a plan. As dessert was being cleared, Lisa began her third monologue of the evening, this one about humility. There's something so refreshing about simplicity, don't you think? She said, folding her napkin with theatrical care. People these days are obsessed with flashy careers and status. It's better to live modestly, to stay grounded. Real character comes from restraint. Miles nodded sagely. Totally. I mean, what's the point of chasing wealth if it changes who you are? I've always said that. Gerald grunted in agreement. You see someone walking in with a Rolex and a fancy car? All ego. You want to know who they really are? Look at how they treat the guy mowing the lawn. Meredith, seated at the end of the table, didn't speak. She looked down at her hands, steady, lined, strong. Hands that had once performed surgeries during war zone relief missions. Hands that had signed off on million-dollar donations for children's hospitals. Hands that had scrubbed her daughter's back when she was sick with scarlet fever and had nowhere else to go. She should have felt rage. Instead, she felt the cold ache of something far worse. Disappointment. Emily still hadn't said a word. Lisa returned with a plastic tray holding off-brand cookies. I didn't have time to bake, she chirped. I'm sure you understand, dear. Meredith nodded, taking a small sugar cookie she didn't eat. Of course. Lisa sat down and folded her hands primly. You know, Emily is such a lovely young woman, so polished, so refined, and to think she came from such humble beginnings. She smiled directly at Meredith. She's really done well for herself, escaping all that. The words hit harder than intended, not because they were cruel, but because they were delivered with genuine, syrupy delight. Lisa truly believed she was offering a compliment. Meredith felt her breath catch for half a beat, not from offense, from clarity. She smiled softly. Yes, she said, she's risen far. Emily still said nothing. Miles stood stretching. I'll take your coat for you, Meredith, he said, grabbing the modest beige trench draped over the stair rail. Oh, Meredith said quickly, standing as well. Actually, let me... But she was a second too late. Miles was already reaching into the inner pocket to hang it properly when something fluttered to the floor. A white card. He bent to pick it up, flipped it over, froze. There, embossed in simple black ink, were the words, Dr. Meredith Lancaster, MD Medical Strategist, Founder, Phoenix Medical Trust Private Advisory, Oncology and Crisis Intervention. His brow furrowed. He turned the card over again, as if waiting for it to vanish. Lisa leaned forward. "What's that, dear?" Just a business card. From someone, Miles mumbled, slipping it back into the coat pocket, but not before his fingers trembled slightly. Meredith kept her expression neutral, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeve. "Oh dear, I must have left one of my old cards in that pocket. So careless." "Phoenix Medical Trust?" Lisa repeated, her brow tightening. "Isn't that the company? Wasn't there an article in Forbes about it last year?" "I wouldn't know," Meredith replied, voice light. "I don't keep up with business anymore. Too much excitement for someone my age." Silence. The kind that falls when polite facades begin to fray. "Well," Lisa said after a beat, forcing a smile, "we should get a picture before the night ends." "Oh, yes," Emily said finally, standing too quickly. "Let's all go to the sitting room." They gathered before the fireplace, framed by a stiff wreath and family portraits. Lisa gestured toward a camera mounted near the ceiling. "Miles set up our new smart camera. It captures automatically. Say, family." "Family," they chorused. The camera clicked. Meredith's smile was gentle, but her eyes, sharp, calculated, directed not at the lens, but at the tiny red recording light above it. A message, subtle, but there. Later, the footage would be reviewed, and someone, probably Lisa, would freeze the frame and wonder why the help was smiling like a queen. As they all walked back toward the door, Lisa took Emily's arm and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "We're just so proud of you, sweetheart. You've done so well. You've left all that behind. It's like you were born to something better." That word again, better. Meredith's fingers curled slightly at her side. Emily offered a wan smile, eyes flicking quickly toward her mother, just for a moment, then away. Meredith met Lisa's gaze squarely. "Thank you for dinner," she said with warmth that wasn't warmth. "It's been enlightening." Lisa beamed. "Anytime, dear." As Meredith stepped out into the cool night, the door closing behind her with finality, she exhaled slowly, not from exhaustion, but from confirmation. She had seen enough. 3 days passed before Emily realized something was wrong. At first, she chalked it up to busyness, her own, her fiancé's, the endless swirl of bridal showers, venue tours, and guest lists. There was always something to handle, always an excuse to delay. But by the 4th day, when her 3rd message to her mother went unanswered, a knot began to form in her chest. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Hope you got home safe. Let's catch up soon, okay?" No reply. "Hey, wondering if you're free to look over the guest list. Just want your input." Nothing. By the 7th day, even the read receipts were gone. Meredith's name disappeared from the recently active section of Emily's messages. No more dots. No more signs. Like a signal going dark. At first, Emily tried to rationalize it. Maybe her mother's phone had died. Maybe she'd gone on one of her long countryside walks and forgot to bring it. Maybe she just needed space after that slightly awkward dinner. But when the wedding planner asked for the final RSVP list, and Emily realized she hadn't included her mother's name, hadn't even told the planner to reserve a seat for her, something inside her cracked. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Mother of the bride. Then she erased the words. Meredith Lancaster was no longer part of the plan. Back in Connecticut, the estate remained as quiet as ever, but now it felt different. Rooms that once held echoes of Emily's laughter now sat hollow. The hallway where she'd hung her childhood drawings was bare. Even the kitchen, usually filled with the scent of coffee and lavender, smelled like nothing at all. Meredith had unplugged the landline. She'd canceled her garden club appointments, let the cleaning staff go on indefinite paid leave. And when the florist called to confirm the arrangement she'd intended to surprise Emily with, an arch of ivory roses to match the gown her daughter used to dream about, Meredith simply said, "I won't be needing that anymore," and hung up. No explanation, no drama, just silence. She moved through her days like a ghost, watering her orchids, organizing the same drawer twice, reading without remembering the words. Each sunset felt the same as the last. Time blurred into a soft ache. She wasn't angry. That would have implied energy. No, what Meredith felt was something colder, quieter, harder to define. Not quite grief, not quite betrayal, more like erasure. She'd spent her life building, first her family, then her business, then her name. But in the end, her own daughter had asked her to step quietly into the wings so the spotlight could shine uninterrupted. So Meredith had done just that. Emily told people her mother was traveling. When friends asked why Meredith hadn't been at the engagement party, she said she wasn't feeling well. When the caterer inquired about dietary restrictions for the parents' table, Emily responded, "Just the Morrisons." The word mother never escaped her lips. Even Miles didn't push. He was too busy selecting wine pairings and menu fonts. The absence grew louder with every detail planned. Meredith wasn't just avoiding the wedding. She was removing herself entirely. No Instagram likes, no surprise calls, no birthday card when Emily's birthday rolled around 2 weeks before the ceremony. No flowers, no texts, no questions. It was as if she had been a figment, fabricated for a past that no longer served the narrative. One evening, alone in the penthouse apartment, Emily sat curled on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through old photos. She stopped on one of them at the beach. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her mother had lifted her in the air, ocean foam crashing at their feet, both their faces lit with laughter. She remembered the way Meredith smelled of lemongrass and vanilla, the way she used to hum under her breath when folding laundry, the sound of her heels clicking down the hall on late work nights. She remembered a woman who was always there, and now wasn't. She opened her phone and typed again, "Mom, I'm sorry if I made you feel small. That's not what I meant. I was just trying to make things easier for everyone. Please call me." She waited an hour, then 3. The message remained unread. In Connecticut, Meredith stared at the same message on her locked screen. She hadn't deleted it. She didn't block her daughter, but she didn't open it either. Her finger hovered over the read button, but didn't press. Instead, she turned her attention to the quiet evening outside her window. The pond shimmered in the late twilight. The breeze moved through the grass like a whisper. She took a sip of tea and returned to her desk. There, in front of her, lay a sealed envelope. One she'd been preparing for a while now. Its label read, "To be opened, June 12th, wedding day." She placed it beside a second envelope. This one had no label, just her handwriting on the flap. It simply said, "Sometimes the absence is the loudest answer." The morning Meredith signed the final documents, the air outside was unnaturally still. Not a single leaf stirred on the tall oaks surrounding her Connecticut estate. The birds were quiet. Even the wind, so familiar against her windows each dawn, seemed to pause. She looked at the stack of papers before her. Legal agreements, transfer authorizations, exit clauses. Her name appeared again and again. Dr. Meredith Lancaster, founder and executive chair. With a final stroke of her pen, she divested her entire stake in Phoenix Medical Trust. Not sold, not handed off. She simply exited, triggering a pre-programmed clause that would transfer her voting rights to a non-profit arm she'd quietly established over a decade ago, one that prioritized public clinics and women's health. The company's public relations team would awaken to a firestorm. Investors would scramble to interpret the decision. The board would convene emergency meetings. She left a statement timed to release at 9:20 a.m. On Monday, Sometimes true healing requires letting go. I have always built quietly. Now I exit with the same intent. Let the future be brighter for everyone. The media would spin it as a graceful retirement. They wouldn't know it was the fuse of a quiet bomb. Across town, chaos had its own timing. It began with a Reddit post. Low resolution, 30 seconds long. A woman, elderly, modestly dressed, sitting stiffly in a dining room. The camera captured the edges of the table. Faint voices. Then came the line, "She's just the housekeeper, Emily's mom or something." Laughter. The woman's smile didn't waver, but her eyes, those were the center of the storm. The clip cut off, but the damage had already been done. By afternoon, the video was everywhere. TikTok influencers stitched it with reactions, disbelief, outrage, confusion. Journalists picked up the story. Mother of the bride or maid. Bloggers speculated about classism, generational wealth, family loyalty. And someone, no one knew who, connected the clip to a certain Forbes cover from 3 years ago. Suddenly, the woman in the video wasn't just anyone. She was Dr. Meredith Lancaster, a woman once ranked among the top 10 private healthcare innovators in the world, a billionaire philanthropist, a mother. The internet lost its collective mind. Emily saw the clip at 2:12 p.m. It had been sent by a friend, just a link and the words, "This is your mom?" The moment she tapped it open, her stomach dropped. She watched her mother sit there, perfectly still, as Miles made the joke, watched her not flinch, not speak, not leave, just smile. A smile so gentle it shattered something inside her. Then came the comments, "That's her mother? She sat there and took that? This is beyond cruel. Who even treats anyone like this, let alone the mother of your future wife? I'm embarrassed for the bride. She didn't say anything." The rage wasn't quiet. It grew by the hour. Justice for Meredith began trending on Twitter by evening. Journalists called the Phoenix Medical Trust offices, only to discover she had just resigned. Speculation exploded. Was this retaliation? Was she pushed out? Was she making a statement? They didn't know the timing wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. Miles tried to control the damage. He issued a vague apology. "This was a misunderstanding. I love and respect my future mother-in-law deeply." No one believed it. Emily posted a photo of her and Meredith from 10 years ago with the caption, "My mother taught me grace. I failed to show her the same." But it was too late. The narrative had shifted. Meredith wasn't just a guest. She was a symbol of how invisible people become when they stop announcing their worth, of how easy it is to dismiss someone when you think they can't hurt you, of how dangerous silence can be when wielded by the right person. And through it all, Meredith remained invisible. She didn't post a rebuttal, didn't issue a statement, didn't grant interviews. She simply tended her garden, answered no calls, and watched the chaos from her sunroom, tea in hand, wrapped in silence. But once, just once, she glanced up at the news segment playing quietly on her wall-mounted screen. The anchor was recapping the timeline, the video leak, the Reddit thread, the discovery, the resignation. They ended with the quote from her press release, "Sometimes true healing requires letting go." And Meredith, calm, unreadable, smiled, not with triumph, but with something softer, something deeper, something earned. It had been nearly a week since the internet discovered who Meredith Lancaster truly was, and her estate remained untouched by the digital storm. No reporters at the gate, no helicopters, just long shadows across the garden and the quiet tick of old clocks echoing through polished hallways. That morning, the doorbell rang for the first time in days. Meredith opened it to find a face she hadn't seen in over a decade. "Clara," she breathed. Clara Whitmore, former fellow surgeon and one of the few who'd seen Meredith through the worst, through the early clinic years, the lawsuits, the late-night surgeries in underfunded war zones. She stood on the porch in her raincoat, holding a small brown paper bag. "I brought pastries," she said, the kitchen filled with the warm scent of almond croissants as they sat at the old breakfast table. The same one Emily had scribbled on as a child, the same one that now sat clean and quiet. Clara didn't mention the video, or the trending hashtags, or the fact that Meredith's face was now being dissected by morning talk shows as the new icon of dignified silence. Instead, she asked softly, "Do you remember Kinshasa?" Meredith chuckled, breaking her croissant in half. "God, that tent. We operated with no electricity and a scalpel that had rust on the handle. We saved 14 lives in 3 days, Clara said. You stitched a 9-year-old girl back together with a flashlight in your mouth." Meredith shook her head. "It feels like someone else's life." Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a tattered magazine, Forbes, the 30th Anniversary Women Who Built edition. Meredith's face graced the cover, arms crossed, white coat pristine, the subheadline bold, "The Woman Who Rewrote the Future of Medicine." Meredith stared at the photo, then slowly ran a hand across the page. It had been years since she'd looked at it, years since she let herself remember what that moment meant. "Do you know why I kept this?" Clara asked. "Because when everything went sideways with my license and you took the fall for that botched program in Syria, you never told anyone it was me who'd misdiagnosed that boy. You took the blame. Quietly. Like always." "I didn't want you buried," Meredith murmured. "I knew you'd fix it. And I did. Because of you." They sat in silence. Clara's eyes searched Meredith's face. "So why are you letting them bury you now?" Meredith said nothing. Clara continued. "You built a legacy, Mer. You saved lives. You made medicine safer for women and children. You trained hundreds of young doctors, and now you're letting people reduce you to a meme in a 30-second clip." Meredith exhaled. "It's not about reputation, Clara. It's about Emily, about what she asked of me, who she wanted me to become." Clara leaned forward. "No, it's about who she's become, because you let her forget who you are." That struck harder than Meredith expected. That night, after Clara left, Meredith poured herself a glass of wine and sat at her mahogany desk. The Forbes magazine still lay open beside her. She stared at it for a long time, then opened her laptop. She didn't go to Twitter, she didn't open the news. Instead, she opened an old folder titled Legacy. Inside were letters of recommendation she'd written for medical interns, testimonials from patients, emails from nonprofit partners. At the bottom, a subfolder, Emily, Letters Never Sent. She clicked. Dozens of Word documents opened, each one dated, unsent, raw. "Today you called me dramatic for crying when you said you'd move across the country. I wasn't angry. I was grieving something I couldn't say. You'll never know how many nights I stayed awake watching your fever. You only remember that you got better. I never wanted you to worship me, just not to erase me." Meredith stared at the blinking cursor of the last letter, and for the first time in days, she began typing again. She didn't know exactly what would come next, but she knew this. She had spent her entire life building others up. Maybe now was the time to remind the world and her daughter that she still stood tall. The next morning brought a softness to the sky, light gray, the kind that carried the smell of rain long before it fell. Meredith stood at the window with her coffee, watching the clouds gather, when Clara's text came through. "Still in town. Can we talk?" An hour later, they sat on the back patio under the old cedar pergola. Clara held her cup with both hands, her expression unreadable. "There's something I didn't tell you yesterday," she began, voice low, "and I didn't say it then because, well, I wasn't sure if you could take another cut, but I think you need to hear this." Meredith raised an eyebrow, already bracing for the wait. Clara took a breath. 2 years ago, I ran into Emily at a conference in Boston. It was a fundraising gala. Pretty low profile. She was there as a design consultant for the venue. She introduced herself to the donors as someone who came from humble beginnings, said she'd built everything herself without help, that she was proud to be self-made. Meredith stiffened. And? She mentioned you, Clara said, but not as you are. She told them you were a small-town nurse, said you worked hard but never really made it, that you passed on quiet values, not ambition. Everyone thought it was touching. The words hit Meredith like a slow burn, not a slap, not a punch, but a knife, quiet, methodical, intentional. Clara continued gently, I remember standing there, listening, thinking, is she embarrassed or just rewriting history to make herself feel more accomplished? Meredith turned her face slightly away, her grip on the mug tightening. She knew, she whispered. She knew all along who I was, what I built, what I sacrificed. Clara nodded. It wasn't ignorance, it was a choice. The silence between them thickened, filled with all the years Meredith had quietly poured herself into Emily's life. Tuition paid in full before invoices even arrived, apartment leases signed in her name, startup funds slipped into birthday envelopes. And yet, her daughter had edited the story. Erased the mother who was too inconveniently successful, too loudly accomplished for the narrative of grit and self-made rise. She didn't want to be your daughter, Clara said softly. She wanted to be someone else's version of herself. That was the moment something inside Meredith fractured, not from rage, but from sorrow so deep it felt ancient. I always knew Emily craved independence, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but I thought it was about finding her voice. I never imagined she'd build that voice on the ruins of mine. Clara reached over, laying a hand over Meredith's. You were never the obstacle, Mare. You were the ladder she climbed, and then pulled up behind her. The words stuck in Meredith's chest. How many times had she believed she was stepping back for Emily's sake, staying quiet to give her daughter space, letting herself be seen as ordinary so Emily could shine brighter? She thought it was love. It was love. But it had also been permission. Permission for Emily to pretend her success sprang from nothing but talent and luck, without legacy, without a mother who once walked into rooms filled with men twice her age and walked out with funding, policy change, or signed legislation. Now, Meredith saw it clearly. It hadn't been the Morrison family who delivered the deepest betrayal. It had been the daughter she raised to be bold, but who had turned that boldness into erasure, not malice. Just something colder. Convenience. Meredith stood slowly, setting her coffee down. Her gaze swept the horizon. I let her build herself in the shadows of my silence, she said. But now the silence is screaming. Clara stood too. So what will you do? Meredith looked down at her hands, still strong, still precise. Then she walked back inside, straight to her desk, and opened the leather-bound folder marked Estate, Public Assets. One tab read, Philanthropic Contributions. Another, Media Archives. And another, Legacy Planning. Emily. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning numbers, dates, donations. Then, in the space where her daughter's name appeared, on a list of future trustees and foundations, Meredith picked up her pen and began to cross things out. The first thing she did was cut her hair. Not drastically, but just enough to remind herself that change was happening. The gray curls, once carefully styled to appear non-threatening, now framed her face with purpose, not passivity. She stood before the mirror and smiled, not with vanity, but recognition. The woman staring back was no longer waiting to be acknowledged. She had remembered who she was. Meredith Lancaster was not coming back. She had already arrived. The startup was barely 6 months old. Run out of a modest brownstone in Queens, the team called themselves Nest, a small, passionate group focused on revolutionizing how America treated its elderly, not through retirement homes or sterile clinics, but through embedded community wellness, mobile care units, mental health mentorship, and intergenerational programming. They were broke. They were exhausted, and they were exactly what Meredith had been looking for. She reached out under a pseudonym, Anne Holloway, her grandmother's name, sent a short email. "I've reviewed your model. You're 2 steps away from burning out. I can help." At first, the founders didn't know who she was. They assumed she was a retired nurse or nonprofit consultant. She wore plain slacks, used an outdated flip phone, and carried a leather satchel that had seen better decades. But then she helped them renegotiate a licensing agreement with a stubborn city official in under 48 hours. Then she redrafted their funding proposal and got them a meeting with a senator's office in D.C. Then she restructured their board model to make space for elder representation, something no one on the team had even thought to consider. They began calling her the General, and she let them. Each night she returned to her estate with quiet satisfaction. No press, no fanfare, just progress. In the evenings, after her walks, she began writing. Not fiction, not memoir, but memory, fragments. She didn't want to tell the world who she was. That felt unnecessary now. Instead, she wrote about what it meant to be underestimated, to be asked to shrink, to be quietly erased, not by enemies, but by the very people you love. Her essays were signed only ML. She submitted the first to a women's magazine under the subject line, "On Being the Invisible Architect." It went viral in 2 days. By week's end, 5 more outlets requested follow-up pieces. Podcasts wanted interviews. Influencers quoted her anonymously. "She's like the oracle for women over 60, someone tweeted. "She sounds like my mother, and I never listened to mine. I'm listening now," said another. Still, Meredith remained unnamed. She had no desire to cash in on redemption or social fame. She wasn't correcting a narrative. She was planting seeds. Then came the podcast interview. It was for a new series called Legacy Lines, featuring unknown voices behind famous lives. Meredith agreed under one condition: no cameras, just audio, just words. She spoke for an hour about sacrifice, about how women are taught to give without ledger, to disappear behind others' success, to believe silence is grace. She never mentioned Emily, or the Morrisons, or Forbes, but anyone who knew the viral video knew, and the world leaned in. By the 3rd month, Nest had expanded to 2 more boroughs. Meredith declined all titles. She accepted no shares, just asked that her monthly retainer be donated to the scholarship fund they'd started for elder caregivers. She did, however, accept an invitation to attend one of their first community dinners. No photographers were present, just folding tables, fairy lights, and people over 70 laughing like they hadn't in years. One of the staff, 24, idealistic and kind, stood to raise a toast. "I don't know who ML really is," she said, "but she reminded us that being old doesn't mean being finished. Some roots grow deeper before they bloom again." The crowd clapped. Meredith lifted her paper cup of ginger tea. She didn't need a standing ovation. She didn't need forgiveness. She had found something better: purpose. And this time, it didn't come with applause. It came with impact. 2 weeks before Emily's wedding, Miles Morrison walked into a modest conference room in downtown Manhattan, expecting a simple pitch. His fintech startup was on its last legs. Investors were wary. Market trust had dipped. He needed fresh capital, fast. His PR consultant, a bright-eyed 20-something with a knack for buzzwords, had arranged a private meeting with potential funders. No names were given, just a senior partner from a philanthropic venture network who had shown interest in socially responsible tech. As he sat down at the conference table, he glanced around. Minimalist decor, a pitcher of cucumber water, a modest logo on the back wall, Nest Alliance. He didn't think twice. The door opened. a young woman stepped in, someone he'd never seen before, and introduced herself as the Director of Strategic Partnerships. "Before we begin," she said, handing him a non-disclosure agreement, "we'd like to show you the impact model that caught our benefactor's attention." A short video played. It showed caregivers helping elderly clients use VR to revisit their childhood homes, teens reading poetry to Alzheimer's patients, pop-up clinics offering telehealth services in areas Miles couldn't pronounce. Then came the logo again. Nest. He leaned forward. "I thought Nest was a nonprofit." The woman smiled. "We believe in blending models, social good with smart capital. It's how we attract partners like you." Miles's eyes lit up. He could already see the headlines. "FinTech meets community wellness." "And your lead investor?" he asked. She didn't answer, just handed him a folder. He flipped it open and stopped cold. At the bottom of the financial projection sheet was a signature, initials only. ML. A strange chill ran down his spine. He didn't know why it unnerved him. He didn't yet realize those two letters were the silent storm circling back into his life. Across town, in a sleek hotel ballroom at the St. Cecilia Grand final wedding preparations were underway. It was a venue so exclusive it didn't advertise publicly. Bookings were by referral only. The ballroom itself held history: diplomatic receptions, silent auctions for elite causes, the occasional billionaire's vow renewal. Emily had been told the booking was a last-minute miracle by her wedding planner, who claimed a previous bride had canceled due to family complications. She never asked who had footed the deposit. If she had, she might have noticed that all invoices listed a billing reference, Holloway Estates Trust. Meredith had paid for the entire venue up front, in full, quietly, anonymously. And in doing so, she had acquired what no emotional confrontation ever could: control. The layout of the space, the lighting, the seating plan, the guest flow, even the staff assignments. She didn't need revenge. She had precision. When the florist asked about centerpiece preferences, Meredith requested white peonies, the flower her late husband had used in his first apology bouquet. When the lighting technician asked about ambiance, she requested warm amber tones. "To soften sharp words," she said cryptically. And when the venue manager asked if she wanted to attend the ceremony, she replied only, "I'll be present." Not as a guest, not as a mother of the bride, but as something else entirely: an observer, a conductor. Nest, meanwhile, had entered into a strategic data licensing agreement with Miles's company, one that gave them insight into the startup's internal metrics, weaknesses, and public messaging. Miles didn't realize the terms he'd agreed to in his eagerness for funding allowed his investors to monitor more than just ROI. They could observe influence, narrative, behavior. It wasn't surveillance, it was orchestration. And Meredith, behind the initials ML, played the strings like a maestro. The public still didn't know her name, but her words were spreading. The essays she published anonymously had become viral TED-style monologues read aloud on podcasts and turned into short-form video reels. One quote, in particular, was now appearing in bookstores on quote walls and social media feeds. "A woman doesn't need to shout to be heard. She only needs to choose when to speak." ML wedding blogs were buzzing with the story of the mother who never spoke, yet changed the conversation. Influencers debated it. College professors assigned it. The irony? Emily's wedding was now being framed by a quote from her own mother, one she didn't even realize belonged to her. As the countdown to the ceremony ticked closer, Meredith stood in the upstairs suite of the hotel, looking down at the polished ballroom floor. The florals were perfect, the lighting golden. The air held the hum of wealth, curated elegance, and well-bottled tension. She had no intention of causing chaos. That would be too easy. Instead, she had written a short card. It was placed under Emily's seat. 3 lines. A daughter once asked her mother to become invisible. She did, and in doing so, she became unforgettable. ML. No signature. No confrontation. Just a whisper. Power, after all, was most potent when mistaken for silence. The St. Cecilia Grand buzzed with polite chaos as the final guests arrived, each cloaked in satin, tuxedos, and expectation. Champagne flowed like gossip, and the soft sounds of a string quartet mingled with the clinking of crystal glasses. The Morrison-Lancaster wedding was poised to be the social event of the season. Outside the main lobby, the valet line moved smoothly, except for the moment a 1965 vintage Mercedes pulled up. It wasn't flashy, but it was memorable. Timeless elegance, rather than ostentatious luxury. From the driver's seat stepped Meredith. She wore a navy silk dress with a simple brooch, hair pinned into a graceful twist. No diamonds, no theatrics, but the way she carried herself silenced the street around her for half a breath. She walked with deliberate calm toward the guest list checkpoint. "Good afternoon," she said, voice measured. The young man behind the podium smiled professionally. "Name, please." "Meredith Lancaster." His fingers typed, then paused. Another attempt. His eyes scanned the list. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't see your name here. Are you at the wedding?" "Yes," she said simply. "I'm the mother of the bride." That gave him pause. He looked up, then back at the list. "I'm sorry, I have orders to allow only listed guests. You're not on the registry." Meredith didn't flinch. "Is there a manager I can speak with?" "I'm afraid I'll have to call someone. Would you mind stepping aside for just a moment?" She stepped to the side, as instructed, eyes calmly surveying the scene. People passed her without knowing her name. Bridesmaids adjusting heels, groomsmen sneaking drinks, relatives posing for photos. It was a world spinning without her in it, and yet it revolved around her. Then a voice called from the stairs behind her. "My God, is that Dr. Lancaster?" Meredith turned. A tall man in his 60s descended from the marble staircase, navy suit tailored to perfection, flanked by two assistants with tablets. He moved with the confidence of capital. It was James Alden, founder of the Alden Group, a major investor in elder care infrastructure across the Northeast. He reached her, extended both hands. "Dr. Lancaster, I didn't know you were attending today." The valet manager's ears perked up instantly. Meredith nodded cordially. "Mr. Alden, it's been a while." "I read your last essay about invisible women. Brilliant. And that Nest initiative you've been advising, inspired work." The valet boy's eyes widened. "You know her?" he asked hesitantly. "Know her?" Alden chuckled. "This woman revolutionized my approach to senior care infrastructure. She's one of the sharpest minds in healthcare policy reform. You're lucky she even showed up." Meredith raised an eyebrow at the young man. "Shall we try the list again?" The boy fumbled with his tablet, hands trembling. "No need," Alden said. "She's with me." With that, he offered Meredith his arm. She took it. They walked into the hotel together. Inside the ballroom, the ceremony had just begun. Emily stood under an elaborate floral arch, arm hooked through Rick's, glowing in lace and anticipation. She had no idea what was unfolding just 50 feet beyond the velvet curtains. As Meredith entered the rear aisle with Alden at her side, a few heads turned, then more. A quiet ripple moved through the room, not unlike wind through tall grass, subtle at first, then undeniable. Someone whispered, "Is that—" Another pulled out their phone. By the time Meredith reached the edge of the seated crowd, murmurs had shifted into audible gasps. Rick turned and went pale. Emily followed his gaze and dropped her bouquet. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then someone near the front, a tech entrepreneur perhaps, or a junior politician, broke the silence. "That's her. That's ML, the Forbes woman, the advisor at Nest. She's the Meredith Lancaster." The weight of recognition hit like a tremor. Guests who had casually smiled at Meredith days earlier now stared as if royalty had walked in. The orchestra faltered. Even the officiant paused. Rick recovered first. Sort of. He stepped forward, attempting a smile. "Mrs. Lancaster, I didn't know you did... We didn't... The list... I wasn't invited," Meredith said, voice level, "but I decided to come anyway." Rick's smile evaporated. Emily stepped toward her mother, hands shaking. "Why are you here?" "To see my daughter get married." "I told you..." Emily's voice cracked, eyes darting toward the crowd. "This is not the time." "Neither was the dinner," Meredith replied softly. A hush spread through the room. Then Alden, ever the statesman, stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "For those of you who don't know," he said, "this woman built one of the most respected medical consulting networks in the country. She's the reason your parents might receive better care next year, and she's the reason Nest exists. If anyone deserves to witness this marriage, it's her." The silence was now reverent. Meredith looked at her daughter. "I didn't come to ruin your wedding, Emily. I came to witness it. As a mother, as someone you once trusted. I'll sit in the back if that's what you want, but I won't be invisible." Emily's eyes welled. For a moment, Meredith thought she might walk away. But instead, Emily reached out and took her mother's hand. The ceremony resumed, but the energy had shifted. Gone was the poised, perfectly timed choreography. In its place was something rawer, heavier, the kind of silence that follows a revelation no one can ignore. Emily walked down the aisle with Rick, but her grip on his arm was loose. Her eyes kept drifting toward the back row, where Meredith now sat straight-backed and silent, flanked by stunned strangers and startled relatives. The vows were said, the rings exchanged. The kiss, brief, obligatory, was met with restrained applause. But all anyone could talk about was her. Who was she really? Why wasn't she on the guest list? And why did a Forbes-featured philanthropist walk in like a ghost reclaiming her place? At the reception, waiters offered champagne, but few drank it. Guests whispered across linen-covered tables. The floral arrangements now seemed like background to something far more compelling. Then, without fanfare, Meredith rose from her seat. A staff member, clearly briefed, handed her a microphone without hesitation. She didn't step onto the stage. She didn't raise her voice. But somehow, the entire room stilled. Meredith looked at Emily. Not Rick, not the Morrisons, not the investors watching from the sidelines, but only her daughter. "I wasn't supposed to speak today," she began, her voice calm, every word landing with grace, "and I promised to keep this brief." The room leaned in. "When Emily was 6, Meredith said, she wanted to be a ballerina. She danced in rain boots in the kitchen. We didn't have much, but she thought we were rich. And in a way we were." She smiled faintly. "Over the years, I made choices. To protect her. To build something from very little. To give her a future she wouldn't have to fear. Sometimes those choices came with silence. And sometimes they came with stories I let others write." Emily's eyes were glassy. "I'm not here to correct anyone, not today. I just wanted to say, congratulations." She turned slightly to face the room. "Emily is a brilliant, resilient woman, and today she starts a new chapter. I hope it's filled with kindness, with truth, and with the strength to remember who she is, even when others try to tell her otherwise." Then gently, she returned the mic to the staff member and walked out. No mic drop, no confrontation, just a quiet, poised exit, leaving the entire ballroom reeling. A pause hung in the air. Then from a back corner, a woman began clapping, slowly, then another, until the room, awkward, unsure, joined in. It wasn't standing ovation. It was something deeper. Respect. That night, Emily didn't go to the hotel suite booked for the newlyweds. She took a cab north, past the lights of Manhattan, past the suburbs, to the gravel road that led to the estate she'd once called home. Her makeup had faded, her dress wrinkled at the hem, but none of it mattered. She stood at the front door, eyes wet, hands trembling, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Meredith stood there, Barefoot in a loose sweater, teacup in hand, they stared at each other for a long time. Neither spoke. Then Emily stepped forward and collapsed into her mother's arms. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I was so ashamed of myself, of how I treated you, of not standing up for you. I thought I had to build something alone. I didn't want people to think I was just the daughter of someone." Meredith stroked her hair like she had when Emily was small. "You didn't have to be just my daughter," she said softly. "You already were you." "I let them call you the help," Emily whispered, her voice breaking, "and I said nothing." "I know," Meredith said. Emily pulled back, tears streaking her cheeks. "And still, you came. You didn't ruin anything. You didn't expose them. You just stood there." Meredith took a step back, just enough to look her daughter in the eye. Then she asked one simple question. "Do you know who I am now?" Emily's breath caught, not just from the question, but from the weight of everything behind it. The Forbes articles, the Nest Initiative, the essays signed ML, the peonies, the hotel, all of it. "I do," she whispered. And Meredith pulled her back into an embrace, not tight, but true. Later that night, Meredith returned to her study. She opened her laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document titled simply, "For Emily, Final Chapter." And she began to type. Not to the world, not to the press, but to the one reader who now understood everything. To the girl in rain boots, to the woman in the white dress, to the daughter who had finally seen her,